Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Brooklyn Rail's 96 New Social Environment. I'm Malvika, and I have the pleasure and privilege of being your MC today for a conversation between Yasi Alipour and Kambui Olujimi. We're also thrilled to have the poet Rabih Ahmed here as a special treat, who will read to close today's program. And now to introduce today's host. Yasi Alipour is an Iranian artist, writer, thinker, and folder who currently lives in Brooklyn and wonders about paper, politics, and performance. She teaches at Columbia University, where she also received her MFA and SVA, and is currently a resident at the Sharp Valentis Studio program. Yasi is also a dearly beloved contributor to The Rail. Yasi, take it away.
Great, thank you, Malvika. Thanks everyone for joining us for the conversation today. I must say I really look forward to talking to Kambui about everything, including the current moment, his recent work. I'm going to start with a very brief review of everything that Kambui does, even though it's nearly impossible. Kambui is born and raised in Bed-Stuy. He received his MFA from Columbia. I feel like we have a slight Columbia cult happening. He has had many exhibitions, including Zulu Time at Madison Museum of Contemporary Art, A Life in Pictures at MIT List Visual Arts, Solastalgia at Q Art Foundation. His videos have been screened at Sundance, Studio Museum of Harlem, MoMA PS1, MoCA LA, and Mass MoCA. He has internationally exhibited in Bangkok, in Reina Sofia, in Madrid, in Finland, Hong Kong, and many other places. He's received many awards, including residencies at Black Rock Senegal, Skowhegan, the Robert Rauschenberg Foundation, and the MacDowell Colony. He's a recipient of the Neifeld Fellowship. He's writing about his work, has appeared in New Yorker, Art Forum, Art in America, our own Brooklyn Rail, and New York Times. And just to name some of his more recent monographs, in 2017, Zulu Time was published, and there's also Wayward North from 2012. I've had the pleasure of working with Kambui in many weird, different ways and projects to kind of offer my brief intro to Kambui's work. For me, the thing that has been very intriguing about his practice is its refusal to distinguish between abstraction and figuration, between concept, or dealing with material and form. And then Kambui has moved between different mediums, from performance to videos to sculptures, and now works on paper and painting. I know that's a mode where many contemporary artists function, but there's something unique about the collide of all these different questions in Kambui's work. With that, Kambui, I want us to start with you giving us a brief intro. We're gonna mostly focus on your recent work and your works on paper. But yeah, thank you for accepting our invitation. You are mute.
Not anymore. Yeah, thanks for having me. Can everybody hear me okay? Yeah, I'm really glad, man. There's so many people that I love that are on this call. It's got me grinning. You know, I've been cooped up in the crib for what, 4 months? It's like the first time I'm seeing like half these people. So you gotta forgive me if I can't stop grinning.
I love that.
But I'm glad. I can't see you all right now, but we'll get back to uncontrollably smiling later. Yeah, let's get it.
Okay. So we started with kind of going through some of your earlier work very briefly, and some of them are fairly recent. But I think to kind of start and like ground our conversation, seems to me that the recurring question in your work as you move between mediums and different ideas and histories and politics is the body. So I wanted to ask you about the relationship, the idea of the body with your work, as we look at some of your earlier work that dealt with performance.
Yeah. I wanted to, I don't know, I think I kind of think about the body in terms of a series of points. So it's not so much just, how would I say it, just the singular confines of the flesh or even of the imprint that the flesh makes. So I wanted to look through some of this work around dance marathons from the 20s and 30s that I did for about 7, 8 years. And this first one is called Finding and Forgetting, this one here. And these dance marathons would go on for like, in the 20s, they would go on for like 80 hours, but in the 30s, they extended and they became perpetual motion contests, kind of. And they would go on for 5 or 6 months, 24 hours, 7 days a week. And really what it was about is this idea of capacity. And I think when we talk about body, we're often talking about what is the capacity, whether it's the capacity for compassion, for love, for communication over distance, for memory. All of these things are sort of, I feel like, are paired against the capacity of flesh or the capacity of body, however we're thinking about it. And so in some of these works, I'm thinking about my own ideas of capacity. So in this one, I dance from sunrise to sunset with the same rules as the dance marathons, which are 90 minutes on, 15 minutes off. But after like a couple breaks, you just stop. And that was a 12-hour performance, and people could come join me if they wanted. And then we had, I did a similar piece in Detroit at Young World International, where my path through the event space was built by a series of performers and set to live music. So for me, it was kind of goes back to, again, that idea of a self. So when I was a kid, my parents used to talk about all the things that were working against you, structural racism, redlining, all kinds of different things. But there was also a conspiracy of good people. And so this is the way you get picked up after school when your mom got to work late. This is the way you learn how to, play saxophone when you ain't got no saxophone and your parents can't afford one. It's like, it's basically the way community invests in you and grows you.
I always loved, I heard you use that term, the conspiracy of good people, and I've always been really blown away by that. So with that work, you also talked a lot about, it's interesting when you talk about the dance marathon, there's a moment where you usually talk about the people who had the privilege to go to these events and look at people like dance for months. Basically, people would get married there, people would it had its own theatrics.
Yeah.
In a time of economic crisis, and it became a form of entertainment or a contemporary way, a historic way of thinking about reality TV. But it also activated the viewers. I'm really intrigued by your collaborations with the sound artists in these endurance performances, because you all kind of create what you call, it's like a form of a community that activates the audiences too. But with that, suddenly the platform itself became the piece. So you were telling me that these are in conversation with these platforms, the abstract. Are there prints?
Yeah. What did you say?
Are they prints?
Yeah, these are silk screens. Thank you, Tomasu. Not for doing them, just for annoying me for 2 years. Make it print. So these,
I confirm that.
Yeah. these started out as just the drawings to make the platforms. And so where it's lighter, it's higher. I mean, where it's lighter, it's lower. Where it's darker, it's higher. And they were just ways for me to describe what I was seeing when I had to work with somebody to build a piece that would take, weeks. How do you then transform it? But part of what's at play in the making is like kind of a fragmentation of the body. The same way I'll go back. The same way in Finding and Forgetting, when you move through when you move through the piece, you don't have legs, you don't have arms, like you're elevated, you descend. And so there's this like sort of abstraction of the individual. And that term to me cuts both ways. The individual can be abstracted in the sort of service of dehumanizing, like the Holocaust or any kind of atrocity or genocide that happens. That's the first move, right? But then the abstraction also happens when you throw yourself into sound or throw yourself over distance or into, you dematerialize yourself. So one time, there was a curator who came to my block in Bedford-Stuyvesant, and it was, somebody came up to me and they said, "Kambui!" And the curator looked and said, "Why do you say your name like that?" And it was the first time that I really ever thought about it, that to say it like that mimics the sound of my name when you holler from down the block, or the sound in a stadium, or the sound when you are like traveling. And so even though they were right up on me, by saying it like that puts us in like transforms or transports us to another place where we're now in a wide open spot. We're now in a different sound environment and geographic landscape. And I was like, when I went to explain that, I was like, that's kind of fire. But that's the kind of like thing that you do. I feel like that's, to me, that's Blackness. That's also Brooklyn. That's, it's a constant morphing of the body for a number of different reasons,
That's so interesting, because I was trying to figure out what are the right ways to explain why I'm so fascinated with your relationship with both abstraction and figuration. Seems like both are so key to your work, where it's like it almost feels contradictory. But I think that kind of put it perfectly. Maybe this is a great place to move to your North Star project, if you feel like it.
Yeah, you know what? I want to just say before,
definitely.
Before we go to North Star, one of the things about this, these sculptures are standalone pieces, but then they're activated and programmed. And so I collaborate with, Margaret Jenkins Dance Company, or this junior high school arts program. I've had poets. It then becomes a site, and in that, again, you can transform yourself in each space that you are, so hopefully it becomes it sounds kind of like sci-fi, but like a transporter beam, like a place where you can then inhabit other selves and other possibilities. These are just from another project. So one of the ways that I work over a long period of time, I work in different mediums, but they're kind of like a collection of intersecting circles. And so Blind Sum was a piece that I did at Brooklyn Academy of Music. And there were long exposures thinking about the sort of vacancy and the void in that mythic space that the dance marathons hold, because they were super segregated. Yeah, and these are photographs I shot in Brooklyn and Detroit.
It's interesting because I feel like a lot of your video installations have that, like, recreate this space of transformation, or even just this space for the body to exist. Perhaps in that second way of how you describe abstraction. It's you mentioned that you just said that the dance marathons were also really segregated.
Yeah, they were completely segregated. Because it's during the 1930s.
Right.
And so when I was looking back at it, I was like, oftentimes with segregation in this country, there's a black version. There's something that like people were like, well, we're still gonna do it anyway, but I couldn't find it. I couldn't find any marathons. And I thought that was for two reasons. One, being black in the 1930s and even today is an endurance contest on its own. So you don't need the construct. But then the other thing is like, there's a different relationship through the diaspora than it is in the West. And that relationship is like, dance is not sometimes it. Like it's, my sister is an architect, and she's doing, Amina Blackshear, she's doing some work around kinetic knowledge and AI, like that. So there's this idea of artificial intelligence, but kinetic intelligence. And so it's been exciting, you know, talking with her about this idea of the rhythmic and kinetic intelligence that just happens in cultures around the world and constantly, you know.
Sorry, you're blowing my mind a bit. I'm like, I need a second to really take that in.
No, that's my sister's fault.
It's your sister's fault. No, and before I was thinking about the body in relationship to your work, the body is both like the starting point of politics, kind of the site of politics, and as the space of transportation of different cultures, of movement and survival. There's something that feels significant about this. Do you feel comfortable moving to North Star? Because I think all of this comes to North Star too.
Yeah, we can.
Okay, so North Star is one of your more recent projects. I know it's a project that is going to be realized in many different formats and include interviews and videos and installations. But I'm really intrigued by the paintings.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm always suspicious when I say paintings. I'm like, paintings? Like, really?
I'm training myself to say it and just say it like, yes, paintings.
Paintings.
I told
own it.
Paint, and then she looked at me, she was like, are you crazy?
But there's something you say within that I find to be very moving and intense. I was looking at one of your interviews relating to this project and thinking about the gravity of oppression and what it means to free the Black body from that gravity of oppression in this imagined space, or even momentarily.
Yeah.
And then in your conversations around this work, you kind of emphasize on the significance of Black joy too.
Yeah. I'll say a little bit about the project. Say that again?
Go ahead, take over.
So North Star is this project that is super early in development. The whole global pandemic has sort of slowed down the process a lot, but I've started, what the project is like you said, it starts with this idea, like the Black body in the West and Western art history is always saddled with as a kind of station of trauma and violence. And I would say it's almost an expectation on the constructions of of personhood, of Blackness. And I started thinking, well, what then, if joy then is just a release from that innate gravity and it's momentary and then we return, what happens when we are in a zero gravity? What is the Black body in zero gravity where there is no return to oppression? There is, and I believe that being Black in America, one of the most defining things you can do is be happy, be truly happy. And so joy becomes this act of defiance, whether it's, there's a whole history of it, whether it's, Black soldiers who fought in Vietnam who would dap each other up, to show love, they would get court-martialed, or whether it's, Ali, or whether it's Serena Crip walking and people losing their mind, or whether it's, the invention of laughing barrels where enslaved Africans were forced to laugh in barrels so that enslavers wouldn't have to deal with seeing them be heavy. Like all of these things, the history in this country in particular with the beating of what I consider Black Rhapsody. And so getting to that, that's another term that I've been thinking about and writing a little bit about. But if you can exist in a place, if I can exist in Black Rhapsody and my body will be in a state of zero gravity. So this is the sort of hope for the work to then begin to build it. It's almost like my hypothesis for the work. And the work will be a film, a series of sculptures that are holographed. I'm doing these holograms, and then these large-scale drawings. One I'm working on behind me is 7 foot square. And so these are some of the ones that I've finished so far.
So I have like a few of like scattered thoughts. I was thinking today that in the past days where we've been in conversation around the work, I feel like in our first conversation, we talked a lot about spirituality and like the cosmos. And I think this body of work really relates to that. Also how this body of work talks to your body as these like large scale drawings. I also had this other thought thinking about your earlier notes. I was reading somewhere in all the calls to decolonize art history, someone wrote something about don't forget to include joy when talking about marginalized bodies. Like don't get rid of that part. And I always think about this, like a weird side note. I always think there's this page, like it's like a old school Facebook page called Life Goes On in Iran. It's just like people being on the street. I'm like, why is this news? Like people existing and living their everyday life. Like old man walks, and it's like this exotified Instagram page. What it means for life going on becomes like this myth almost.
Well, that's the thing with the joy, like, in the sort of abstracting of an individual, you have to take away that joy. It's one of the things that makes people people. And so I feel like that's a tool of dehumanization. Right. And that's in action, but also in the construction of the mythology of whoever that person is, or the myth of, however that person is projected or peoples are projected. One of the things that I wanted to say about the film for North Star is that I plan to take a group of Black folk up into a parabola fight where you go up 50,000 feet and then you free fall and you get 30 seconds of weightlessness. And so that's going to be one of that, and interviews and footage from the space programs on the continent. Those are sort of the spines of the video. But I think it's important to have that moment of you know, walking it, like doing it, like seeing what it is, you know, to be weightless even for a second. And so I think, I don't know, I've talked to some people who have done it, and one person, the thing that made me think of this, one person was like, I just laughed. I just couldn't stop laughing. And then they said it 5 times and they just laughed the whole time.
I didn't even know that could be possible. No, but so I think one of the reasons why I'm really drawn to these paintings is both the idea of oppression itself being gravity, like so constant, and how the moments of joy can be like precarious, like you get the 30 seconds. It's interesting, especially in these paintings that deal, I also feel like these, I mean, that's my brain, but I feel like these also kind of think about abstract geometry in a complicated way too, thinking about the forms. But it's interesting, these abstract, like the bodies, the gathering of bodies, I constantly wonder if they're floating or falling. And that feels really important in this conversation about what it means to think about oppression as gravity.
Also, I wanted there to be a multiplicity, both of bodies and like bodies folding out of one another. There's always, you know, in writing for a long time, there was so much talk about the Black voice. And it was just like, really? Like, there's just one? And so I really wanted to refute that even in, so I'll draw one figure multiple times and change them drastically in the course of that scene. So those are some of the things that I just think about with this work and with that kind of position in time.
It's interesting, in our correspondence, I think at one point you made a reference to alienation. And I think that's also an important word in all, kind of in relationship to this work and the ideas of this work. But I think, at least for me, I feel like a lot of the experience of being alienated in the hegemonic Western spaces is how you're like tokenized, how you're singled out, how you're void of community, how you become the individual body. There's something about the echoing of the body that feels important here. There's also some Spivak writing on echo that I barely understand, but I think it really relates to this, but I will not go there because I have a million other questions. So I wanted to also spend some time on your recent drawings that you've been doing in quarantine time. Do we feel ready going there?
I wanted to say one more thing about what you were saying about alienation. There's a way in which you become alien. So if you're being subjugated and you still, you know, pack a lunch of laughter or pack a lunch of joy, you know, and you still have that, somehow there's this concept that you're like, it's so alien, it's so hard to fit into description. I mean, we do it all the time. I used to work with a war photographer, and we would work on these edits, Ben Rackman, and we would work on all of these edits, and he was photographing in Kosovo and Afghanistan, and he would have photos of like people playing and like people get married, and you know, in the middle of rubble.
Right.
And that idea of simultaneity I don't feel like wasn't embraced by American press.
Right.
Because it was complicated, because it was what I would consider alien. Because if you acknowledge that simultaneity, then you have to, again, acknowledge it. You can't just be like sorry for them. You have to acknowledge the complexity of that humanity.
Right.
So.
Complexity is a good word. Yeah, I remember as the designated Middle East person, I remember someone looking at this photo of kids in Iraq, like playing soccer before the war in Saddam's era. She was like, see, they were happy. And I was like, no, people play soccer. Like, no matter what happens, people will play soccer on the street. Does it? You'd be shocked. Kids play soccer.
You're
They
like,
have
that's
fun.
nothing.
Yeah, literally. We're gonna shift gears though. I'm glad we packed a bit of like the lunch of joy. I like that term. Feel like this is kind of a 180, but also very much related to it, or maybe that's what we were talking about, thinking about complexity. But to start our conversation about the recent drawings, I was really intrigued by this drawing. In talking to you about it, you mentioned how the drawing was kind of in response or inspired by the mass burials that are happening because of COVID. But we ended up having a pretty complicated conversation about mourning and the complexity of mourning. To start with, and that relates to everything we looked at so far too. To start with, I want to think about something you mentioned in one of your really early interviews, and that was the idea of the pause. You were talking about like life in New York or in Brooklyn and the speed of life in the city. And then there's moments where you have a pause, like this intense, like you see something and you're just like there, you have this intimate relationship where time pauses. So I was thinking about that kind of pause in your work, where these contradictory or complicated moments can happen at the same time. I was also wondering, and I know I asked you this question years ago, but I constantly wonder if that kind of a pause and that intense moment, I'm like, is it nostalgia or is it trauma or is it a combination? But yeah, do you want to introduce the recent drawing?
Yeah. I think this so I, like everyone else, has been in quarantine for 4 months or something like that, 5 months. Time has really sort of melted together, but I started making this work, and this is almost like a studio visit in a lot of ways, because North Star is, a year and change out from being completed. These drawings I'm making right now, and I'm still grappling with what this collection is. The way I'm thinking of it is there's so much happening right now in this period, and it's like a concentrate. And it's like, I don't drink coffee, but you know how to get those little things, and it's like the little tiny concentrate, you put it in espresso.
I was like, come on, is it a drug? Are you taking pills?
So, right now, this moment is so many things happen every day. It's hard to even process. And so I started looking at these small drawings as a way to sort of process this, like we were talking about that simultaneity, like all of these things that are happening. So, we're almost at like 150,000 dead, in this country. In New York City, we have 18,000 dead. And these are people we haven't had a chance to go through a process of mourning. We weren't, I think not being able to be at the funerals for a lot of people, that is a place of processing, and we haven't had a place to process that specific trauma or specific loss. And there's been a lot of loss and trauma in these last 4 months. And so I started looking at Hart's Island is where Potter's Field is. And Potter's Field is like a kind of proverbial term for a grave for unclaimed peoples, and so that's where a lot of remains end up. And over the course, over 100 years, we have 1.5 million people buried on Hart Island. And so during COVID, you would just see, trucks pull up, and being in Queens, near Elmhurst Hospital, like I saw those refrigerated trucks, you know, and they're not filled up with ice cream. It's like, there's this way in which it's unfathomable, but at the same time, there's another moment coming. There's like, again, there's more things coming up, you know? And so these small drawings that I made in my house, it was a way in which I could process all of those. So this is made the night the 3rd precinct in Minneapolis burned after the murder of George Floyd. And yeah, I don't really have a lot to say about it.
I think we talked a few weeks ago, and it was in this moment where the protests were more visible. I mean, it's weird. I feel like each time I do one of these real interviews, there's something traumatic that happened the day before, and now I'm like, it might be less visible, but they just snatched someone from the streets, so it's still here. But that time when we talked, I asked you specifically about the politics of mourning, because there was this energy on the street and this feeling of something is being done because of all the Black Lives Matter protests, but then there was the deep sense of mourning. And I wanted to ask you specifically about the relationship of African diaspora and mourning. I was interested in that, as I was telling you that time, because I know in my culture within Shiism, mourning is very political. Mourning is how the society, mourning is social. Mourning is how the myth of the society is built, kind of this failure, this epic failure and injustice. So there's all these rituals of mourning that are very social. I know there are similar ways of thinking about Judaic traditions, but then it seems to me that like Western European, my understanding of mourning in those cultures is much more individual and much less political. So yeah, I want to hear the relationship of mourning with this work, especially thinking about the African diaspora.
Yeah, we're gonna close out with some work that actually I was working on pretty intensely. Walk with me, I was working on that before I started what I'm calling like these quarantine drawings, these paintings that are sort of processing this moment. But I was already thinking about this idea of how do we pay tribute? You know, how do we remember? How do we talk about the vacancy? And, you know, in my opinion, being Black in this country is to be fugitive. And you're constantly getting ready to survive some shit. You're constantly getting ready to lace them up, because things that seem like, you know, there's the old twice as good, half as far. That's something that you can expect, you know. But then there's all kinds of things that you just can't even plan for, or don't even, like rule changes, or like it's like, oh, these are not the rules anymore. It's backwards day. And so a society that treats a population like that not only keeps them on edge, sort of takes away that space for mourning. So for me, when we get to, you know, Miss Owen, I'll talk more about it, but that was the first time I had a sort of the luxury in some ways. And I feel, I feel fucked up that I still feel like it's a luxury to mourn. You know, like, I think that's something that I've been able to, I can clear my schedule. I can, you know, work it out somehow, you know. But there was a time in my life when you just gotta go, you gotta get up and you gotta do whatever you gotta do again and again. And I think that there's, mourning becomes something that's something that's like pour one out, where it's a migrant. Like you can do it anywhere. It doesn't take the ceremony is of libation. The ceremony of libation is sacred, but it requires so little. You know, and I think that that's one of many ways that Black Americans, and I think a lot of people who don't necessarily have, you know, historically the time or the space within certain power structures to mourn, figure it out. Or we were talking about how people give people nicknames or you know, would straight up call you. Like when I first met my uncles and aunts in Baltimore, they would just call me by my grandfather's name, who I never met. It was just like, that's your name. And I think if I would have been out there, that would have been my name. It would have been like, that's who you are now. You know? So I think that there's a kind of everyday to the morning.
Yeah, it's weird, but I feel like there's something in that where joy and mourning kind of meet or become intertwined. Because also you have these early pieces, like really early pieces that I personally really love, which were these suitcases you used to make for people who passed away. And a lot of them had plants in them, like they required care.
Yeah.
There would be something living within them. But they were also portable. As you said, it's like the migrant body or the fugitive body. And you used to make it for friends and family members.
On the block. Yeah.
Yeah.
When you move a lot, when you like bounce around between people's, you know, family members' cribs, and there's this waning or like figuring out, you know, when you pack, even if you just go for a short trip, you got to decide what's most important to you. What do you really need? And, you know, it whittles your life down. Like, is this shirt really that important? Is this rock? You know, like I got rocks, you know, I skip rocks. I got rocks that I've been carrying around since I was 18, you know, and I'm just like, that's one of those things that's important to me. And so a suitcase will make you do that. And I appreciate that about suitcases, and that's why that form made perfect sense, to make a memorial that you then, you know, give and remember that person.
That just really made me laugh because as someone who lives kind of between two places, one time I wanted to bring a rock and my mom was like, that's heavy. It's a rock. It's like in the name. You cannot pack that in a suitcase. That's too heavy. Like, can't you have a feather for a memory? Like, that can get on the plane. Can you tell us a bit about this one? Because like I was reading about it, I was really fascinated with the idea. There's something about this that relates to the dance marathons for me.
This piece?
Yeah.
Yeah, you were talking about, so in the midst of everything that's going on, you know, this global pandemic, you know, a sort of acknowledgement of, you know, centuries of systemic racism. Capitalism's still out there in these here streets. And people are also trying to like do beyond just like capitalism. People are trying to have sport, have, you know, find joy in a weird way, in different ways. And so this was something that stuck out to me. Korean Baseball Association, the KBO, they've been having games and they don't have fans, so they were trying to fill the stands. And so they went out, and at first they had like cardboard cutouts, and then they were like, nah, it doesn't really work. And then they got these dolls that later they discovered were sex dolls. And there were all of these, you know, sex dolls holding up like, go team, go. And then they were like, yeah, that's not it. They figured it out with stuffed animals. So it's like, you know, 10, 20,000 stuffed animals in the stands. And I felt like it described the moment that we're kind of like just hot mess stumbling forward, trying to figure out how to piece together whatever is going to look like not even normal, but next, you know.
Yeah, going through the drawings, the first time I saw the drawings of the mass burials, I was like, are these aliens? Like, is this another planet? And then it's like, oh shit, it's the moment we're living in. And I looked at that one, I was like, this is fucking absurd. Like, what the fuck, Kambui? Like, what is this? And I was like, oh shit, we're living this. Like, this is our life.
That was Thursday.
That was Thursday. I really love these. You know, I have a million things to say about this, but first, do you want to introduce it?
Yeah. I've been doing work around monuments and monument removal, and thinking about that moment when a monument's about to be unveiled is completely abstract. And it's full of the potential and the promise that, like, oh, this is the new regime, this is the new way, and full of hope, right? But then when it don't work out and it's covered and it's been defamed and or even defiled, and you tarp it, that's the same gesture. In some ways, it's like the same moment, like the folding of time. And I was interested in, when it's covered, it's both of those things infinitely. So I started making these like tarp, and also then the figure, going back to figure and abstraction, it's the blob, it's this weird shapeless thing, and what it represents is so far away from what it will in a moment. Or in many moments. It's like kind of a unique time for it to be nebular.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I was preparing for this. I was like, will I say colonialism? I will say colonialism. This is the moment. You brought it in. No, for me, it's really interesting because so far we've talked about the past and the idea of like, how do we memorialize anything? And then thinking about these statues and the idea of having this figure that will stand for this history and like occupy space in that way. Like for me, I also come from a very abstract geometrics culture. But for me, there's something about the presence of that figure that is colonialism, and kind of echoes itself. And you constantly do this in your work. And I think like that existed in the flags in Zulu Time too, where it's like, there's this moment between disaster and potential, like the moment of the explosion. It's interesting what happens in this in-between moment of these symbolic statues that are like in many cases simply like symbols of racism. Like that's why they stand. They're like, great. Like, we're racist. What is, like, how they echo themselves even as they're being destroyed? Like, there's this in-between space, this, like, push and pull. It's like you see the statue in its absence, but also its complete abstraction. You were also talking about how thinking about, like, memorials, how different cultures deal with making monuments that aren't about the figure. Like, what is a monument that doesn't go through the white man on a horse?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I taught a class at Columbia on monuments and memoriam, and we brought in, we were lucky enough to get Tom Finkelpearl to come in. And
now you're bragging.
Tom was so much fun too. I was like, you're not going back to work, man. Twisted your ankle. You fell down. But yeah, it was interesting. One of the things he brought up was like, he had people, you know, representatives from the Lenape Nation who, when weighing in on the monuments around New York, was like, you know, that's cool and all, but we don't really get down like that. We're interested in a place to have process, to have storytelling, to convene. Convening was the vehicle of remembrance. not something that's just marble or dead or, you know, or bronze. Like, that's not how you remember. And, you know, it's not just philanthropic. You got people who, you know, from like prayer trees to just songs to, you know, remembrance, the action of it, the process of it. In Yoruba, you know, altars, all, like, it's too long a list, but thinking about memoriam as something that exists in a multiverse of time versus the atemporality of Western sculpture. So this Roosevelt is a kind of composite. It's a recent, it's from a recent image of the Natural History Museum, the unveiling of this sculpture, the equestrian statue of Theodore Roosevelt in 3 acts, that being unveiled in 1940, and then the future of it being removed. And I was thinking about I was like, well, how do you really remember things? And you don't remember them with a singularity of time. And that practice that I'm talking about it's about a multiverse of time and a multiverse of remembrance. And so that process is so key.
It's interesting because, can we go back?
Oh, yeah.
I'm like, I said I'm not going to go to history, but you brought it somehow, maybe. No, for me, thinking about remembrance in that way, and relates to what we were talking about before, I think there's this way of thinking about history with capital A that is also colonialism. This like one time, this is how things process. And I also feel like that's the space that can't allow the complexity of something like Black joy. It's like it constantly has to erase it. I don't know, I was really taken by what you said about this idea of making a memorial that is about storytelling, that is about convening, that is about multitude, that doesn't allow another linear alternative to a history. Like, okay, this is the other, like we're gonna, right.
Yeah.
And for me, in a really weird way, that relates to what you were saying about your friend and how like he uttered your name. You know, it's like that utterance itself had meaning, but there's nothing linear about that meaning. That's my ramble about history. Now we can move to the next project.
Oh, wow. It was spot on. I'll go to, so this is a project that, it's a 5-year project that I just finished up called Walk With Me. And when I say finish up, I mean, I'm done with outfacing, like making something to go out into the world. But my guardian angel, this woman, Catherine Arline, who was amazing and helped form me as an individual, was a pillar of the Bed-Stuy community, city of New York, passed, and I was wrecked. And it was the first time that I got to inhabit grief. And it was kind of unbelievable to me because, you know, I didn't know about that like that. Like I didn't know about, shutting down the world and just processing and looking in at myself and looking in at what, you know, a lifetime relationship is. And so I couldn't, when I started making, when she passed, I just couldn't do much. Like I couldn't turn on the camera. I tried to take a picture. I was like, I can't figure out how to do this. And I was like, you've been taking pictures since you was 15. And it was the first time that I couldn't even inhabit my body. Like I was a hot mess, like, and that's an understatement. But I wanted to work with ink. And I couldn't access, I couldn't figure out, I couldn't use power tools because I just didn't have the focus and probably would chop myself up. Like I was so, there was no way to express what was happening. And it was like every cell in my body was screaming at the same time. And so I started doing this, started making these ink paintings that, you know, was a medium that I had so little control in. And I was terrible. I was terrible. And it was what I could do. And I would go out to Governor's Island, just sit out there and make these, you know. And 5 years later, I have, you know, I made more than 200, you know, I made hundreds of them. And this is the work that I'm going to show at Project for Empty Space in September. We have a book coming out. But this project starts, you know, 5 years ago, but during quarantine, while I was there, a lot of what I was doing even before the death of George Floyd was kind of looking in and trying to process all the stuff that's in your body that you're just pushing downstream. You're like, yo, I'm I, let's keep it going, I'm I. And this was the first time it was like, you are not. And this is one of many things that prove that.
You know, I was thinking today, it's interesting in all that you've done and all your different iterations of your bio, and it's like always things added and taken away. You always start by saying that you were born and raised in Bed-Stuy. And I have one student who I always say, I tell him that your Brooklyn is my Tehran. And I sometimes wonder, it's like, what is that relationship with that space? For me, what is really moving about the drawings of Catherine Arline is also who she was for the community. It's like, as someone who was really active there. And I know you worked with different, like, I'm thinking about the videos you had where it's in conversation with Detroit too. I was thinking about gentrification as another form of displacement. And her, I don't know, for me, like, she also kind of echoes what Bed-Stuy is, like what that, like a stand-in for a community. Like, there's something about your repetition for me that feels really complicated, almost out of words. And I don't know, just like working on that one image of her. And that's when she moved to Brooklyn?
Yeah, Miss Online was from Husky, North Carolina.
Yeah. Like having that image repeat, I don't know, for me, it kind of relates. It's like, sometimes I try to imagine, it's like, how do I explain that relationship to Tehran? Like, there's just no words. Like, I have a lot of stories that will make no sense to anyone. But the repetition, like this constant attempt to have her present and like repeated and echoed and failed and continued. I don't know.
Yeah, it's a lot of time sitting with her. It's a lot of time sitting with her and then thinking about community. It's one image of her when she first moves to New York in the late 50s or like mid 50s actually. And, you know, in some ways it's community. Like, I think of them as like, you know, I don't like any one to be by itself. And also it's a kind of, over the 5 years, it's a failing. Like, it's okay for me to, like, I make ones that scare me, that really scare me. I make ones that I'm like, you don't even know what you're doing. And there are times where they come together, like they describe a stretching of time. They and describe how memory is about a slippage. Like, it's not the accuracy. I think it was Byron Campbell does that piece where he asked all these members of his family what color was our crib when we were growing up. He gives them all different swatches. And I think it was a green house, and everybody picked like a whole myriad of different colors. And it's not to get it right. It's that everybody sat down and started talking about what color the house was. So like Miss Online would, whenever you would talk about how to get to a place, had to talk about the people who was there who are there or who might be there. You know, that's just how you describe a place. You know, it's like, oh yeah, there used to be such and such a guy, and you know, such and such that lives there, and their kids, and they had a cousin and their pets, and I'm like, yeah, my friend John lives just around the corner. But it's an interesting way because it's the language of memorial. Like, to constantly, we were talking about like pour one out or how you carry, in describing location that way, it's a constant homage and memorial to folks. And that's the book.
I'm pausing because, okay, you tell me how you feel. There's this one quote from Edward Glissant's Poetics of Relation. And I've been thinking a lot about his writing in relationship to your work, because he talks a lot about movement, writing about Martinique and like what he calls rentry. But there's this one chapter called the Black Beach where he talks about this one figure and following this one figure. So I wanted to read this tiny part and then we'll open for Q&A. If you let me nerd out.
Great.
Okay. So he says, there is where I first saw a ghostly young man go by. His tireless wandering traced a frontier between the land and water as invisible as flood tide at night. I'm not sure what he was called, but he no longer answered to any given name. One morning, he started walking and began to pace up down the shore. He refused to speak and no longer admitted the possibility of any language. I wanted to stop there because I know you used to write too. I'll send you more quotes on that. Any final thoughts before we start for Q&A?
No, I think that was a good write-out.
Yeah, so Malvika, if you want to take over.
I'm gonna stop sharing the screen, right?
Great.
Yeah. Thank you both so much. I feel like every single person, like we've all been sitting here like completely stunned. Like everything you're saying is just coming out so beautifully. All the images are so gorgeous. Like this has been so remarkable. So our first question, actually our first two questions, are coming from the remarkable Jalimoni Diabate, who, let me see, who you should be able to turn on your mic. This is like the fun of the live event.
I think you're live.
Ooh, maybe not.
Jelly
Well, I could read their question on their behalf.
Okay.
Let's see. One second. But they're right here. Hey. Okay, here we go. All right, you should be live. Go right ahead. Oh, you can ask your question directly.
Let's ask you a question. Can you hear? We can't hear you.
Yeah. If it's all right, I'll ask the question on your behalf and I'll hope to do it justice. So it's actually two questions. The first is about, well, I'll just read it directly. I have a question about the precinct from afar. It reminds me of the scenes of bombing of Fort McHenry that the Star-Spangled Banner is based on, and the bombing of Fort Sumter in history textbooks. My question for Kambui is, did he intend in painting for this painting to be a triumphant scene like those paintings where people call back to celebrate it? And this is in reference to your monument paintings that are on fire, the George Floyd ones.
Yeah, that's a really good question because I think it's weird to have a national anthem that's a war song, you know, like that's what we're gonna ride with, you know, that's how we're gonna collect ourselves. And though that painting of that inspired the Star Spangled Banner or the event that get captured in that painting felt a little bit like the third precinct on fire. You know, like fireworks were being thrown into the fire and being set off. So you have this kind of, again, I think so much about the simultaneity of the moment that's happening, where there's a destruction and a celebration and an elation and a mourning. All of it's just stacked on stacks. And I hope that piece can sort of keep those layers and keep all of those sort of intact, because it was kind of so hard to describe what I was feeling. But hopefully it is layered like that, and we'll make those historic references as well.
Good answer. The second question, also coming from Jalamori Diabate. These are really awesome questions. So I have two questions about mourning. First, how does Kambui see mourning as part of collective memory? And second, I wanted to ask specifically about the power of that collective memory when people take action in moments like right now.
Yeah, I think mourning moves, it moves in and out of you. You know, one of the things that me and Yasi talked about at some point in knowing each other is about this idea of what are the bounds of the body. So I'm a big believer, like I was made up of two cells. The microbiome, I have all these other bacteria and like organisms that live inside of me that help me exist and be essentially who I am. Plus, I'm made up of all of these other outside things that help me form and shape this notion of self. And so even with mourning, so when you come to something like mourning, you piece yourself back together by your community. Like I can't do shit when Miss Online died. I was useless. It's my friends who are like, oh yeah, you know how to use the camera. Oh yeah, you know how to do this thing. You know, they carry with them bits of you. And so on a fundamental level, mourning is a collective endeavor.
Thank you. Our next question is actually from Fang Bui, our beloved publisher, but will be read by Sophia here at the Rail. Sophia, go right ahead.
Hello.
Hey.
Thank you for such an enjoyable conversation.
Yeah.
It's a very bright Wednesday. So I'm wondering, do your memorial works have any relationship to Jack Whitten's memorial paintings? For example, Ralph Ellison, Muhammad Ali, among others Jack admired?
I think, I feel like I keep wanting, I want to say no, but it's just not true because there's a gravity to it. So it's almost like, you know, the first solo show I did was a conceptual tribute to the life and work of Nina Simone. So, you know, I've done stuff for Romeo Bearden. I've done stuff with Hank Willis Thomas for my friend and his cousin, you know, Sunga. There's no way to say that small memorials and large cultural memorials are not intersecting in my work. But I think that this is something that, you know, I think again, if you don't write your history, the society I live in, they're not writing it for me, you know? And so it's like, if you don't honor your dead, who's going to do that work? And also you need to do that work in order for you to be whole and to be able to move the way you need, you know? So, yeah.
We were talking about joy. I was thinking about this moment where one of your interviews, you talked about some museum exhibition of Kerry James Marshall and being completely floored by it. And like you talked about like how there was floors and floors of Black joy. And I was thinking about your relationship with that work. I feel like your work is so different, but also so in conversation with that.
Whoa, it's getting real reckless now. It's getting real reckless.
Done. I'm done with my time. I'm going to put myself back to mute.
No, I take my compliments, pack them up, eat them little bit by little bit over the next days until.
Yeah.
That show was, she's talking about Mastery by Kate James Marshall, and it was the first time I've been to a lot of museums. It was the first time I went to a museum, and I was like, something's wrong. Something feels weird in here. I had never seen that many works of just Black people. Not Black people marching to be free, not slavery, not fighting, not police brutality, none of that. Just like barbecuing, like getting their hair braided, happy. And happy, not even big happy, just like regular, I'm just like, this is a great day. But it's a good day. And I thought about how foreign in the white spaces, the white cubes that I move through so often in my work, that this was just like an anomaly, and it made an impact on me. And it really made me think about, fostering and bringing the joy that's in my life into these spaces. And into like other times.
I officially put myself on mute. No, that was great. Malvika, take over.
There's so many people that make me smile.
Okay, I have a question that I will read on behalf of Tova from the audience. This question is, who among performing artists do you feel you share an affinity with? Your depictions of bodies floating in space in the recent watercolors, to me, resembled or evoked Carolee Schneemann's kinetic paintings. Also thinking about your sister's kinetic scholarship. And I wanted to add on, I would love to hear like who you feel you share an affinity with beyond just performance art. I would love to know like who are the writers, theorists, like friends, like what is the syllabus of like what built you and like who you see yourself in dialogue with?
Oh, I love making a list. I love making a list. I got a book, none but lists. I got a book of hurricane names that ain't used yet. Like, I love making a list. Who's in that? Yeah, I mean, my sister Amina is here now. I just saw her. This is the architect I was just talking about. But yeah, thinking about who's in that. So like her research, Hanif Abdul-Rakib's writing, especially the poetry. I mean, what is it? Marlon Gaye plays the dozens with the billboards, the Billboard chart. I hope I didn't butcher that. That's a poem that you should check out. For like him, Nina Simone, David Hammonds, some Joe Cocker. Joe Cocker, I love the sweat. I think in terms of performance art, I'm gonna try and like keep my elbows in and sort of answer the question. I mean, Sean Leonardo's work is something that I feel like is astounding, and it's like I can't sort of wrap my head around it. Like in terms of like, I wouldn't say that my work has an akin to. I say I go there to witness, to see, because I think his work operates a lot outside of language, and forces you to build a language in real time with performers, which is something that, you know, him, Ralph Lemon, Pina Bausch, who else is on that? And then there's a lot of people that may not be seen as performers in that way. Like I listen to hip hop, but I really like little moments. Like, you know, my friend makes fun of me because I like the little yeah, the little bits that are said that are sort of thrown away are some of the best. Now that you got what you want more. Like that's the best line in that song, you know? And it's just like okay, now let's get back to what you came for.
I love that. I feel like that really resonates with a lot of what you've been saying about like utterances, like the way your friend like says your name down the street even though you're close by. Yeah, thank you for that list. We're gonna type it up. Our next question comes from Nikki Brisnovali Grilakis, who should be able to turn on your mic momentarily. There we go.
Hello. Hi. So this question is a little loose. I was having a difficulty typing it out, but I was really fascinated by your conversation where you guys were talking about the paintings and drawings you do with sculptures. And I just think it's really interesting, the idea of demolishing or defacing and then erecting statues, and how these are kind of used as these like large things of like white men we're supposed to look up at in history and in the future and present. But I guess I was wondering, if we were to erect new statues like contemporary leaders or heroes or inspirations for the tomorrow's America or today's America, who do you think those people should be or would be or can be?
Well, that's a great question. This is something that in New York is happening. They're commissioning Department of Cultural Affairs, like the New York Art Department, whatever the official title is. They've commissioned 30 new sculptures, all of women, all throughout New York City. So they're committed. That is a new initiative that they have, because I think there's like 100 and change statues in New York, and there's like one of an actual woman that's a person, and then like 3 of a woman as a symbol for like liberty or something. So I think that's sort of a thought about the who's that have been missing. And there are people that I would love to see remembered. I don't know about the statue as the kind of memorial. Like, there's something problematic about the atemporality, the idea that like whoever we put up, those values that exalt them will extend forever or extend for all communities. I kind of like the idea of whatever the sculpture being something that only lasts a certain amount of time, and you have to rebuild it. Therefore, you have to reevaluate, you know, where we at, or who's here, or, you know, how the times have changed. And it may, you know, I'm just like riffing. But I think, so that's my thought on just the structure. But there's a lot of people. I mean, Greg Louganis, my friend Chris Myers did a book of great Americans, and he messed around and asked me to make a list. I was like, I got a list. You know, Henrietta Lacks, you know, I said Nina Simone like 42 times, Audre Lorde, like, there's a lot of, you know, there's like poets that I really like, Paulo Neruda, Aimé Césaire. Then there's like, I feel like I'd be interested also, could we exalt somebody on potential? Like, that would be really interesting to have somebody who, you know, really shined at like 4 or 5 years old. You know, like, what would it be to be on the front side of it, you know, making bets rather than after their life has expired. But those are some of the things that I think about. But I'm more on the like process. I like it when people get together and, you know, talk shit and then say, oh no, they never did that. That's just made up. Da, da, da. Like, that's how you keep someone alive, it's that process of history that's more exciting than the sort of inscription or declaration for me.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for that answer, and thank you also for the question. Okay, we have our next question is coming from Leandra Lawson, and just came in, but it's such a jam, we have to do it. Leandra, you should be able to turn on your microphone now.
Hello, can you hear me?
Perfectly.
Thank you. I just want to thank Kambui and Yasi so much. This has been such a beautiful conversation, so thank you. A lot of the conversation has brought us to this idea of utterance and language and speech. And just to play like devil's advocate, or to consider the opposite, the absence of utterance, language, I wonder if, Kambui, if you could speak to this idea of silence, the absence of utterance as generative for you creatively, etc. Just wondering about what happens without the utterance, kind of.
That, yeah. I'm gonna say the devil don't need no advocates. I always think about that. I'm like, man, but that flip side, I don't see as being so far away. Like we talked a smidget about pause. You know, like when you play music, you play the pauses. You know, it's the same thing about rhythm or beat. That they're like, that moment before sound happens, you need that. And so I think about silence as active, you know, maybe because I was just like a hyper kid. So to be still required so much energy that I never thought of it as something that was passive or like absent. I always thought that it was a kind of a zero grade, but part of the whole spectrum. But yeah, I think it's very generative. I think that's the space where you can rebuild. It's reflection. It's screen. It can also be boundless in a way that language or like output can't be. Like, you know, I can close my eyes and be quiet and be anywhere, be anything, and have a sort of volume that is hard when I'm, you know, moving through the gravity of, you know, Earth, or, you know, all the different physicality of being and projecting.
Can I jump in? Because I thought that was a great question. And I unmuted myself. No, I'm really interested in this question of silence. And I always think about Norbert Phillips and her book Zong, thinking about the importance of silence. But I also constantly wonder, what does it mean to historically and like generationally experience being silenced? I feel like that's something like that's like in my personal history. I know there's this like also like a physical response to the need to speak up because I have been silenced. But then what does it mean to take that space to then create a platform where others like that there we can have silence? There's like to speak up, to ask everyone to take a moment of silence, or to give silence as a space. And in your work, that makes me think about your relationship with the body. Because there's also a lot about the absence of the body, from the platform to the jewelries. We didn't talk about those at all. The jewelries you were making that were like with handcuffs, and they reference the body, but in its absence. I don't know if that's way too vague, but I'm really interested in how the marginalized body is deprived of history and silence by constantly being silenced, by kind of being alienated or refused the experience of joy. Also thinking about gravity in relationship to all of this. I don't know, any thoughts on those things?
I mean, a lot of, the first thing that popped up is having to speak up all the time. And that moment when you're in a spot and something goes sideways, and you don't have to say nothing. Like, you don't have to be the only one advocating against some nonsense. You don't have to be the only one to be like, human. Like, it's a great, when that happens, you're like, I can just, like, shut up. I can just be. And I was thinking about those two things against each other. That's what first thing that popped up. And then there's the history, historically being silence.
It's interesting because that makes me think about how you don't leave the bodies alone. There's always there's more than one. And for me, that is the space where someone else can, like, you can be in silence and someone else can be like, hey, like, I don't know.
Hey, put that
down.
This has been wonderful. Thank you both so much. Yasi, I love when you jump in. We also had a couple of beautiful questions come in, especially one from Ato Ribeiro, which I wish we'd been able to get to, but shout outs. I think it's a good time to move to our poet. So at the Rail, we have a tradition of ending lunch with a poem. We've luckily been able to carry that out into our community events. And today I'm thrilled to welcome the poet Rabih Ahmed to our proverbial stage. Rabih Ahmed is a Ghanaian-American Muslim poet and performer from the Bronx. Her poetry is grounded within the oral traditions and histories of the African diaspora, binding narratives across the Atlantic. She has performed her poetry at the Apollo Theater, New Yorkin Poets Cafe, and throughout the African diaspora. She also has like a beautiful website, runs these like amazing events, and makes like a bunch of apparel. So I will drop all those links in the chat, but you got to check this lady out. Rabih, the floor is yours.
Hi, everyone. How are you all feeling today? Thank you so much for this wonderful space. I truly enjoyed this conversation and all of the points in which that were really coming up for me, which shifted my poems a bit, which is fun, right? Some of the themes, Yasi mentioned Black Joy so much. I was like, well, I gotta go get my Black Joy piece. So we're gonna start off with this poem. Black Joy. Black joy is the sun shining into your NYCHA apartment, birds fluttering around your window, the sun setting above KFC, the calm of streets looking 7 flights up, the smell of Amadang kissing the oil, releasing the fragrance of home. Cassie blasting out of the window bars, is kicking out the double-handed Turner, is birthday cake cutting at the dinner table, is a name chain in the box and name earrings the following year to match, is freedom weaved into braids, climbing monkey bars, swirling down slides, is a pack of chocolate-covered sunflower seeds and the cheddar powdered ones when discontinued, is the little price over little store and the bruised fruit at Brothers, is the one bowling alley in all of the Bronx, Mickey D's across the street for snacks, is buying a pack of gum and only having ownership to one stick, is getting light on Gunther Ave concrete streets, is hopping out of 31 buses, 4-piece nuggets from Wendy's, sweet and sour sauces to get me down B Road, stop by Miss Chin for some hoop earrings, Black Joy is Richie Rich on Fish Ave, is Tomas bread from the African market, is patois off the lips off of dudes on Seymour Avenue, is a blowout from Bernarda's, Black Joy is finally feeling safe in my body to be this joyful on my block, to be this free, this fly. Thank you. Thank you. My second piece, feel free to unmute. I'm very informal with this. Feel free to throw a yas or a snap, whatever you want. We are here. Thank you. I actually wrote that at the very beginning of quarantine, standing at my window right here. So it's been a real beautiful journey amidst all of the trials and the examinations that we've been put under. There's still some blessings coming out of everything. My last piece is entitled Deathless after eBay. We do not die. We exert cyclical resurrections, rise in flames, emit smoke to cleanse the balance of spirits, sometimes play dead for respite. This is not immortality, this is a dance in the air. the sway of hips, the shimmy of shameless hips, the vibrations of a woman unashamed, a body free. We do not die, we lay in luminescence. We set darkness ablaze. We a star casted out of the sky on a mission to ignite illumination from the soil up. Blinked tears expired into pathways to the soul. We done perished midnights ago. We simply do not die. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rabih. And thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kambui and Yasi. Thank you for everyone who came out today, everyone in the chat, everyone with their questions, everyone listening, asking questions internally. This was phenomenal. Please join us all again tomorrow at 1 p.m. for another conversation between filmmaker Nathaniel Dorsky and curator Constance Llewellyn, featuring the phenomenal poet and queen, Patricia Spears Jones. You can now turn on your microphones and say goodbye as you leave.
Thank you for having me. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Amazing
Thank
conversation.
you.
very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Hey, bye.
Awesome. Thank you. Beautiful reading.
Amazing poem.
Rabih was so beautiful.
Yeah, that
So
poem.
beautiful. Thank you, Rabih.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you, Rabih.